Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lawrence Loh. I am resident conductor of the Pittsburgh Symphony. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you here this afternoon. It is our great pleasure to have with us the composer of the first piece on our program. Please give a big welcome to Nancy Galbraith. So we have a wonderful piece that the orchestra has been really enjoying. And this year, as many of you know, we're celebrating Pittsburgh composers as our Composer of the Year. We're very fortunate in Pittsburgh to have a number of really great composers. Today's piece is really wonderful. The orchestra has been commenting to me how much they've enjoyed playing it. And so I think maybe I didn't ask you about the title, but could you tell the audience the title, maybe the genesis of that?
Well, I've said this many times, I always usually name my pieces after the fact. And in this case, it's a little bit strange because, like I say, the word blues is in it, which implies a blues type of piece. I think what is blue in it is maybe there's a chord progression that sounds very bluesy. And then the euphonic part just kind of, I thought it sounded nice with the blues. It's a nice title.
I think the title really works and it matches this piece. Just so that we can get an overall sense of the piece, maybe you could tell us a little bit maybe about the genesis of this piece itself, the inspiration for it, as well as telling us maybe a little bit about the piece itself, the form.
Okay. This piece was originally written for the CMU School of Music's, Carnegie Mellon School of Music's 100th anniversary celebration. And I've been at Carnegie Mellon as a teacher for 30 years, 30 plus. And so when I went to, start writing this piece, to me what was important was the people that I've known there, the generations, if you can only imagine, generations of students that have come and gone, their students who are now my students, my people that I actually studied with there 30 years ago. So there's a lot of relationship, and I was kind of reminiscing at the time when I was starting it. So you'll hear a very reflective opening, and very tonal, very reflective. Then, of course, it's a celebration, so I didn't want to just do reflection all the way through. But I also didn't want to do a slow introduction and then just do fanfare, here we are celebrating. I wanted it to move very smoothly. So you'll hear at the end of the introduction, you will hear it gradually, kind of an American-sounding fugal theme that comes in, and it builds to a very giant climax. And then from that goes into more like a waltz. And then from the waltz it builds up and it hits a 7/8 section, which is very rhythmic, and you'll know when you're there. You know it's time to celebrate. And as a matter of fact, we were laughing about it. I was up on the stage when we were rehearsing and I was dancing. It was so exciting to hear the orchestra play. But then at the end, so anyway, after the 7/8, it just builds and builds, and you'll hear a trumpet fanfare and big bridge chords, and then the same climax that had happened earlier. After that, I have a sense of, I like a lot of symmetry in music. I don't like the kind of thing where it feels like it doesn't make any sense when you're at the end and you say, how did I get there? I kind of like to tie up loose ends. So it ends very similarly to the way it begins, but I don't also like to just do what would be referred to as an ABA. I like to reflect the opening, but I don't like to just repeat it. So you'll hear a very similar ending, but without probably the same level of warmth. It's a little bit more icy at the end, but with the same kind of spirit, very gentle.
things come to mind, I think that may be worth elaborating on. One would be the 7/8 that you talked about. Can you explain to the audience what you mean by 7/8?
7/8, the meter versus being in a it's called an irregular meter, and it just rather than go ba 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 ba, it goes ba 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 ba. There's an extra eighth note in, and it gives it kind of a dance feel. And you'll know when you're there, trust me, because I love percussion. And you'll hear woodblock, and you'll hear marimba, and snare drum. So you'll know when you're at and that's a very distinctive sound as compared to what was happening before in the piece. You'll know when you're at the 7/8.
Right.
And plus you'll start to, hopefully, start to move with the piece a little bit.
Yeah, what's great about actually the way that you write this, 7/8 is an irregular meter, but you make it sound very natural, where it doesn't feel like you have to concentrate to get the rhythm. It's just it's 2 plus 2 plus 3 as far as subdivisions. 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3. The other thing that's kind of complex about it, but then at the same time extremely natural because of the way that she plays it, the woodblock part, if we're thinking 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3, the woodblock is playing 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2, and then way to the end and 1 2 1 2 1 2.
Yeah.
So sometimes the 1 2s are on the beat and sometimes they're off the beat. So that's just continuous. Meanwhile, the beat's kind of shifting around it. Makes it really fun and exciting. At the same time that that's happening, as a listener, the thing that's very striking is the way that the strings, the inner strings, start to play the theme in the 7/8, very firmly entrenched ponticello, so that they have this sort of metallic sound. And you must have had that in your mind.
Oh, absolutely.
This is not just these notes, but this color.
Right. I mean, sul ponticello is when they play very close to the bridge. And it gives it a very harsh, kind of unreal sort of sound. And I love strings, and I love normal. I don't like to use sound effecty kind of things unless they are like Berlioz's Symphony Fantastique,
right,
where they're necessary for the music. And I wanted something really harsh and really in your face almost.
Right. Oh, it's great. It comes alive, and it really brings out actually the rhythm and the articulation, having it ponticello like that. But now let's talk about the beginning of the piece and the way that you orchestrated it. I think is wonderful. I want to ask first, when you're a keyboard player, right? Piano, organ.
Mm-hmm.
Do you hear this beginning, which is scored for strings, harp and piano, bowed vibraphone? Do you hear it in that orchestration, or do you hear the notes and then orchestrate it? How does that come to you?
I always hear orchestration. We were discussing this on Friday, and it would be rather unusual and probably a little bit problematic to have an exposed harp in unison with the piano, because as we were talking, they're doing a rhythm that is a very solid rhythm, and I think what might be difficult about it is that you'll hear a flute melody that lends itself to being very expressive, and yet at the same time you have this quarter note thing that has to remain together. But I knew going in that was going to be slightly difficult, but I wanted that sound. I wanted a different timbre, and I love vibraphone. You'll hear a lot of in this piece, a lot of unusual, perhaps kind of glassy percussion sounds, because in the opening and actually in the end, there is a bowed vibraphone where they actually take a cello bow and draw it across, and it gives a very odd...
Almost like the crystal sound where it sings.
Yeah, crystal glass is almost like that. And also bowed crotales, which are little cymbals, which give a little edgier sound than the vibraphone being bowed.
I thought it was interesting, the first rehearsal, the harp is over there, the piano is over there, and as you know, both of these instruments have, or as you maybe intuitively infer is that when they play, there is a distinct beginning of the sound.
Yeah.
For the harp, they're plucking, and there's an immediacy to that articulation. Piano, they play the note, a hammer strikes a string, and it immediately decays. So if they're not together, it's noticeable.
Yeah.
And they're across the stage, and no matter what, no matter how clear a conductor is, they will probably have a little bit of trouble, and they sometimes were not perfectly together. And
But there's a sound gap there too.
And there's a sound gap, right? So, but it brings me to another thought that first time the orchestra played this piece, what was it like to you? I mean, just listening for the first run through of the Pittsburgh Symphony, reading this, how did it go for you?
It's a very odd kind of sensation, but if you can imagine, it's very intense, and it goes beyond fright. I don't know. It's excitement. It's excitement. It's exhilarating, and I was having so much fun. When things are going well, it's the best experience that you can imagine. When they're not going so well, it could be a nightmare.
Right.
But this was, I mean, from the very, very beginning, and with the rehearsal, it was just we were all on the same page, and it was just a lot of fun.
Were there things that were surprising, things that you didn't expect?
Oh, we were talking. I was describing the two climaxes, major climaxes, which Maestro Nichols really makes a lot out of. You'll know when you are at the climax, but what's unusual about it is that it's exactly the same music, only at the end it's down a step, which you would think would make it not even as dramatic, because you would think it would be up a step would make it more dramatic, because psychologically you remember it before being lower. That won't even strike your mind, believe me. But what's strange about it, which I was shocked about, was the second climax was supposed to sound like, oh yeah, I remember this from before. But it was led into prior, out of something very slow. And the second time, it's coming out of something extremely upbeat. And it's the same music. And it sounds so much bigger the second time. It sounds huge. Yeah. And I think it's the excitement of building up in the rhythmic section, and then all of a sudden you're at the same music that ended the introduction, and it slows down again, and it's very majestic.
It's grandiose.
Grandiose. That was sort of surprising to me. Yeah. And of course, I mean, hearing this orchestra is unbelievable.
Right. I mean, they know how to play new music, and they relish it. I think that they take that responsibility really. They get excited about introducing new music. Yeah. And I think it's one of their trademarks of the PSO. You mentioned an American sounding part, and I thought it might be good to just, without generalizing so much, because I know it's sort of a loaded term, American sounding, but what do you mean by that?
American sounding to me is like the quintessential American composer Copland, who is will be no surprise as a favorite of mine. I think American sounding to me means diatonic harmonies, a very tonal sound, kind of a wholesome sound. Somebody compared it to Boyd Harris, which that's going back a bit, but even the minimalists, I think, sound very American. It's rhythmic, and it's basically, I think, the part of it that comes to me is the diatonic part. Sometimes American means to people, oh, jazz elements or like blues elements and things like that. Or more like Gershwin, maybe, that people think of him as being American sounding. To me, American sounding is diatonic, rich harmony like Appalachian Spring.
Yeah, right, which we're going to perform very soon. I find that the opening definitely has that sense. We have these beds of harmony in the strings that, you know, they slowly morph and change in a very logical way, outlined by, as we were talking about, the harp and piano and the vibraphone, and these layers of harmony just sort of spilling over. It's a very beautiful moment.
You know, it's interesting that sometimes when you do write very harmonically or, you know, tonally, that sometimes I'll also write in a language that you would call polytonal. In other words, two different chords at the same time. And that was one of our biggest problems in the rehearsal, was they said, do you really want an F natural there? Because it will be going against another chord.
Right.
But it's coming out of this pure diatonicism, and then all of a sudden the harmony gets a little bit edgy. Right. And they're expecting it all to sound very, very absolute tonal all the way through.
Right. So how do you, as a composer, you know, and I can relate to this as a conductor, we spend a lot of time by ourselves, kind of not working with other musicians, and not necessarily making sounds or making music except in our own heads or what we're imagining. What do you do to stay in touch with music physically?
Well, and I love this too. Sometimes people think, oh, that must be a burden. I'm a church musician. I play at a Lutheran church in Millvale, and I'm a choir director, and I absolutely love liturgical music. And I think maybe you'll even hear a bit of that in this piece, maybe in the end. I think the maestro said something about Gregorian at the end, Gregorian chant, but I am a church musician, and it's something that I take very seriously, and I love liturgical music.
Yeah, I mean, there's the chime at the end, that has that kind of sound. So I'm just curious, do you also write for your church? Do you write music, or do you?
You know, I was commissioned by Gettysburg Lutheran Seminary at one point to write a mass. And I don't know if you all were familiar with Robert Page. He was the conductor of the Mendelssohn Choir. I went in and I played for him. I played the mass for him. I was about halfway done, and I thought, okay, I'm going to get his feedback. And I went and played the mass for him, and about halfway through he said, do you mind if Mendelssohn plays this or sings this? And I said, oh, well, yeah. Let me get back to it. So anyway, after that experience, then I used to always write for my church choir, but after that experience and hearing Mendelssohn choir, I went kind of from writing more, you know, down roots, home roots kind of thing, into writing and enjoying writing for very large concert choirs. So I've gotten a considerable number of commissions to write choral music. And just recently had the privilege of having the Harvard choirs do a commission, Harvard Glee Club and the Radcliffe Singers, and then the combined choir. So I went from, at that point, being less humble about my choral music, I suppose. And actually, I ended up writing a Requiem Mass for Robert Page's last concert with Mendelssohn Choir, which was a huge piece. So I kind of went from writing for a typical, probably 18-voice church choir down to writing for 150 voices. Once you go there, you don't want to turn back.
Right. Well, it's been such a pleasure getting to know you. Maybe as a last thought, working with Maestro Runnicles, who I think has been hugely successful with the orchestra, and with working with you and your piece, and with our guest soloist, Stephen Huff. What has it been like for you working with him this week?
It's a thrill, you know, to watch. I was sitting right there in the concert, and I was watching. When I said before surreal, when I'm watching a man of his stature putting that much passion and energy into your music, that's at the time when I forget that I actually wrote it. And I was watching him conduct, and I said, oh wow, this is an honor. You know, I mean, to work with somebody of that caliber, he's amazing.
He really is great.
He is.
Well, thank you so much. I will speak just for about 5 minutes about some general things about the rest of the program, but I wanted to thank you so much for joining us. Let's give a big round of applause for our composer and the
I hope you enjoyed it.